Friends, hello. Before you watch, I want to mention I made a high-quality translation of the Tucker Carlson interview with the United States Secretary of the Treasury. There's important information for everyone, so I suggest sharing the link with friends, as it includes a section on Zelensky and Ukraine. This is truly, as they say, straight from the source. This is the direct speech of the United States Secretary of the Treasury, without any informational interference. The only nuance is that I can't upload it to YouTube the way I want because of copyright issues. So, to see everything with the video and translation, you can go to my X account. The link is also under this video. And now you'll see on your screens how to do it. Or here, I'm leaving it for you if you prefer just listening instead of watching in podcast format. Here's the translation in audio format. It's really done with high quality. And once again, I say everyone should hear and see this, because today this information is extremely important for a full understanding of the situation. In any case, I'll ask you both here and on X, please subscribe and like as a small token of appreciation for this translation. Thank you, enjoy watching.
Mr. Secretary, thank you very much for joining us. So, we are at the Ministry of Finance. The President held a press conference next door yesterday where he announced a new global tariff regime. He had promised to do this for 40 years. This didn't come out of nowhere. It was his intention from the very beginning, as he stated. This has alarmed people, his supporters. I just wanted to ask you, in general, what do you think this will lead to?
Well, Tucker, thank you for having me. And you said the President has been talking about this for 4 decades.
Yes.
And this is transformational for the American economy, for the American worker, and for the new Republican alignment. And, it's a combination of old and new ideas. Some of the old ideas were set aside. I always tell everyone, and they don't want to hear it, that the original person who introduced tariffs was Alexander Hamilton.
Yes.
He used tariffs to finance the nation and protect industry. Trump added leverage and uses tariffs for negotiations.
Yes.
But I think it's similar to when Ronald Reagan came in the 1970s. A new day in America, and when I talk to people who remember the Reagan years so fondly,
Yes.
And I remember what it was like, and it was unstable, and the president...
Unstable?
Very unstable. President Reagan stayed the course. And look, this is not an invitation, but at some point in the early 80s, a farmer showed up with a shotgun at the Federal Reserve to kill Paul Volcker for raising rates. Like I said, this is not an invitation for anyone.
Of course not.
To take action. But it was a tough time. And then, in 1984, President Reagan won re-election in 49 states. And, I think they even let Mondale win Minnesota, so it wouldn't look like a complete defeat.
Just so.
Yeah, and that's what President Trump is doing now. For many years, the American middle-class worker was destroyed. American workers suffered a lot. And, we're only just starting to see some studies now. For example, we're seeing studies about the so-called China shock from 2004, which are only now coming out. And that's what that's what I know. But finally, academics are saying, oh God, American workers never recovered after the China shock. What a surprise. And President Trump sensed this 40 years ago. But during the election campaign, starting from 2015 and up to last year, he promised American workers that the old standard of living could return. And because what we've seen over at least the last 20 years since the China shock, but really over the last 30, is these massive distribution problems where the coasts thrived.
Yes.
And in the central part of the country, they just watched as the quality of life expectancy declined. They doubt their children will have better lives, and many just don't care. But President Trump cares. That's the first step toward fixing things. Many of our trading partners, including our allies, have not been good partners. If tariffs are so bad, why do they impose them? Why do they impose them?
Question.
Why do they impose them? Or if the American consumer will pay the tariffs, why do they worry about tariffs?
Right.
Right, because they'll absorb them. So yes, I think this is the beginning of the process. We're going to reindustrialize. Since we had a heavily finance-oriented economy, we stopped making things. Especially many of those that are important for national security. I think that one of the few positive outcomes from COVID was that we had a beta test of what a kinetic war with a major adversary might look like. And it turned out that these highly efficient supply chains were not strategically secure. So we no longer produce our own medicines, our own semiconductors, our own ships. So, if I had to say whether there was any positive outcome from COVID, it was that it woke the world up to these supply chain problems. So, economic security, but that's national security. President Trump and I talked a lot about this, so this is a national security issue that we're seeing here, but it's also an economic security issue, yes. And this, I don't want to say redistribution, but it's, to give working Americans real wage increases and improve their lives. And I said during the campaign that one of my most frequent slogans was, Wall Street is doing great. It can keep thriving. But now it's Main Street's turn. Now it's Main Street's turn. And that's what we saw yesterday. Now it's Main Street's turn.
So, throughout my life, for 55 years, Wall Street has really been the generally accepted indicator of economic health. For example, how's the Dow doing? We have entire television channels dedicated to tracking its progress, which has mostly been positive throughout my life. So, if the average stock prices go down, if the stock market drops, many people see that as a sign that the economy itself is declining. Do you think that's a fair measure?
The market fluctuates. Warren Buffett says that in the short term, the market is a voting machine. In the long term, it's a weighing machine. In the long run, it will be judged whether we have good policies.
Yes.
And in my previous business, I often commented on the structure of the market, its ups and downs. I try not to do that.
Yes.
But for everyone who thinks that these market downturns are entirely related to the president's economic policy, I can say that this market drop started with the Chinese announcement about DeepSeek AI.
That's right.
The so-called Magnificent Seven. Tech stocks have been performing very well, leading the S&P for about 18 months. I think there's a kind of reality check happening in the field of AI. I believe the United States will remain a leader in AI, but AI-related stocks have started to decline. So, if I were to analyze what's happening with the market, I would say it's more of a Magnificent Seven issue, not a Make America Great Again issue.
That's right. So it's deeper. So actually the markets, you're saying, in this particular case with tech stocks, are kind of making a real valuation of companies compared to foreign companies.
Well, that's true. But if we look, the equal-weighted S&P index, even after today's move, is down 4% for the year. On a long-term chart, you wouldn't even notice it.
Yes.
I think the most important thing we can do, what I can do as the finance minister, what President Trump wants to do, is to lay a solid foundation for the core economy. If the core economy is strong, taxes are stable, business is predictable, energy is cheap and abundant, we deregulate, and we treat our workforce well, then we'll have a great stock market.
Fairness is fair. The president, describing his tariff plan, said, look, you could basically fund a lot of government spending with tariffs, and that implies that taxpayers would bear less of the burden. So, do you expect this to be accompanied by a Congress-approved tax cut for the middle class?
Tucker, I just want to go back for a moment to the fact that one of the things tariffs do is that we stand up to other economic systems. The Chinese have a very different economic system. They have low costs. Some would literally call it slave labor. They subsidized industry with subsidized loans. They have a lot of non-tariff barriers. Your show can't be aired there?
Yes.
So, we're facing this, and the revenue from tariffs can be significant. And if we think about the classic tariff revenue model, it would say that if the tariff is 10%, then the currency would strengthen by about 40% of that, which is 4%. Then the manufacturer in the other country would bear about 4%, and the American consumer might face a one-time price adjustment of 2%. With a 10% tariff, the consumer might pay 2% of that. We've seen that. A recent study from a group at Massachusetts Institute of Technology showed that with President Trump's initial tariffs on China of about 20%, the price level increased by 0.07. So, to answer your question, if we could impose a 20% tariff and make foreigners pay for it, and then use that money to reduce our national deficit and keep taxes low here, that would be a very unique formula that hasn't been used in this country for a long time.
And do you think Congress will change the rates? Of course, they are set by Congress.
So, what do we have now? We're in a strange situation between tariff revenues and the actions of the Department of Justice to cut spending. The CBO assessment, and for 35 years I was on the other side of the barricades, and I always used to say, well, CBO says this. And I really didn't realize that the CBO assessment is a lot like Enron's accounting, that it's unrealistic, and when you actually look at the real assessment,
We assume that's how it looked from outside.
of course, well, they're experts in.
The Congressional Budget Office.
It's the Congressional Budget Office, and these are well-intentioned people, but they have some ridiculous rules.
Yes?
For example, think about this. All the estimates are made for 10 years.
Yes, okay.
So they just assume economic growth of 1.7 or 1.8% over 10 years, and that never changes. Whether you raise taxes or lower them, it doesn't change. So when Vice President Harris announced tax increases during the campaign, the Congressional Budget Office rated her very well. And President Trump wanted to make the 2017 tax cuts permanent. That was a shocking number, because growth increases when you lower taxes. But that was a long explanation. We won't get recognition for tariffs in any bill because Congress isn't going to legalize it. The president does it through, executive authority, but the money will come in. We've already received several $100 million from Chinese tariffs from his first term. We're getting about $35 billion a year just from the old Chinese tariffs, not the new ones. So in the Congressional Budget Office window, that's $350 billion, covering many of the president's promises, including no tax on tips, no tax on Social Security, no tax on overtime, the ability to deduct interest on cars made in the United States of America. He supports the decision on affordability for the bottom 50% of workers because they are the ones who will benefit from all four of these programs.
So, looking ahead, a year from now, at the beginning of next April, do you have an estimate of how much the United States government expects to receive from the tariffs announced yesterday?
That will be a moving target.
Of course.
But could it be from $300 billion to $600 billion a year? Of course.
All right, that's a significant income.
Very significant. But what will happen to the rates over time? The ultimate goal of the rates, and the president constantly talks about this. Move your factory here. It's the best solution to avoid the tariff wall. So move your factory from China, from Mexico, from Vietnam. Move it here. So, over time, we will have significant revenue from tariffs at the beginning. Manufacturers will build their factories. Here, tariffs will decrease. But the revenue, well, from the factories, from income taxes, from all the new jobs, will grow. So, we will get this domestically when tariffs go down. And why do tariffs go down? Because we produce it here, our trade deficit goes down.
Oh, so you've obviously thought this through. Do you think the United States has the necessary workforce for this transition?
I think we do. I think with AI, with automation, with, many of these factories that will be new, they will be smart factories. So I think we have all the necessary workforce. And what we're doing on the other side, the reason, besides my support for President Trump, that I walked away from the table and life was good. And, I wanted to step away and really, to tell people that I'm concerned about an impending financial crisis, given the high levels of government spending that are leading to high levels of government debt. So what are we doing? On one hand, the president is revising trade. On the other hand, we are reducing excess workforce in the federal government and decreasing federal borrowing. And then, on the other hand, this will give us the workforce we need for new manufacturing, and we are going to reinvigorate the private sector. So, essentially, the private sector was in a recession during the years of Biden's administration. And this is an opportunity to streamline the federal government and give freedom back to the private sector because it was constrained by excessive regulation and crowded out by the government.
Do you ever think, since your job, part of your job, is to predict the consequences of these policies, that you probably 1 out of 6 in this country are here illegally, 50 million illegals. Then you have AI, and the forecasts there suggest massive disruptions in the labor market, fewer people needed. You mentioned this a minute ago. Then you have tariffs. We assume their effect, but we don't know for sure since we haven't done it. Global response to tariffs. There are a lot of factors that are unknown. They're black boxes, and you think, wow, it's hard to figure out what's going to happen.
Look, it's like, me. I always think that you can never be 100% sure, but you can stay within sight of the guardrails and keep moving forward. I can't remember. On one of the Sunday morning shows, a commentator asked, "Can you promise me there won't be a recession?" I can't guarantee you anything.
Yes.
There's nothing that tells me that it should be. So, I believe that it will work, just like President Reagan believed that supply-side economics would work. But what I do know is that the old system didn't work.
And that's right.
And if you look at a system that doesn't work, you have to be bold to change it. So what wasn't working? Would it really be fun for me to just come in and keep issuing a lot of debt? And it's almost like a bodybuilder taking steroids. On the outside, everything looks great, you're muscular, but on the inside, you're killing your vital organs.
Yes.
That's what was happening here. But it would have been easy to keep pumping up the economy by borrowing a lot of money, creating a lot of government jobs. There was no controversy while we did this. At the same time, but in the end, you'll end up in disaster. If you go back and look, if you look at the financial crisis of 2007 to 2008, the economy looked great right up until that moment. You go back and look at the end of the dot-com bubble, and then the whole credit problem with fraud at WorldCom, Enron, and some other companies. The economy looked great until it didn't. And I think one of the things we won't be praised for, but that this administration will do, is to avoid a continued financial disaster. Think about the fact that they did an analysis according to which one of the reasons September 11 happened was that the airlines didn't want to pay for reinforced doors.
Yes.
They kept resisting. The FAA didn't insist too much, and now we have reinforced doors. So I look at it as if we're installing reinforced doors before the disaster.
What kind of excitement and lobbying activity from foreign governments will there be over the next 3 months? because yesterday the president announced the introduction of a universal tariff, a single standard, but then each country is adjusted by certain factors. But, it's all, as you said, a moving picture. It's an evolving situation. So if I pick a country, Vietnam, China, I would really try to put pressure on this administration to adjust those numbers. What would that look like?
That will be the president's decision, and I think his view is that this has been going on for a long time, for both friends and foes, and we'll see how it unfolds. I think what's more important than discussions with countries will be discussions with companies about what companies want to do. As President Trump said yesterday, the best way to get around tariffs, right? Build your factory here.
Yes.
And what can we do here at the Treasury Department to help with that? We are working to finalize the PUAD tax bill to ensure they have low taxes and full depreciation in the first year. We are working with Secretaries Burgum and Wright on energy security and working on reducing regulations. The president, I don't know if he talked about it yesterday or the day before. The Taiwanese semiconductor company is the largest semiconductor manufacturer in the world. Lee Zeldin, Environmental Protection Agency Commissioner, is working to push through all the necessary permits, because we're just bogged down in this regulatory swamp where it takes so long to get anything done in this country. So, I think announcements from individual companies will be more interesting than announcements from countries.
To sell to Americans, manufacture in America.
Of course, or pay the tariff.
So how is China as a nation going to... This is a big problem for all countries, especially China. How are they going to respond? What will the countermeasure look like?
I'm not sure they'll respond for several reasons. If you look at history, and I used to teach economic history, and when you look at history, but we are a debtor country.
Yes.
We have trade deficits. A country with a surplus is in a weaker position because the Chinese business model, and by the way, Tucker, the Chinese business model and economy, yes, are the most unbalanced in the history of the modern world. We have never seen anything like this in terms of their level of exports relative to their gross domestic product, relative to their population. So yes, I think it will be very difficult for them to try to change the model. They are trying. They are in a deflationary recession, a depression. They are trying to get out of it through exports. Thinking about the Chinese manufacturing system is like that old Disney movie about the brooms carrying buckets.
Yeah.
There's nothing you can do about it. That's their business model. It's not going to stop. Now, what could happen if you said, Scott, what's your dream scenario? That somehow a deal could be made where the United States and China, we want more manufacturing, which would mean a smaller share of consumption in the economy. The Chinese have an unbalanced economy with excessive production. And actually, Chinese consumers, yes, really are left at a disadvantage. So Chinese households, they're stuck in the so-called middle-income trap. And, could we do something together to say, okay, you balance things out, consume more, produce less. We will consume less and produce more in our environment, and we will be military rivals. There will still be economic competition, but we will significantly level the playing field. Now, this won't happen tomorrow, it won't happen in a month, but in the next few years, they may have to change their decision, because in my opinion, their business model is broken. I think President Trump broke their business model with these tariffs.
So, you are describing a well-known scenario. When you take out a bank loan, the bank controls the situation. They can seize the collateral for the loan. But if you take out a large loan, you control the bank.
Exactly. And they just have such a huge deficit with us that
they need our markets.
They can't survive.
Are you sure there's a clear channel of communication between the two governments to settle the details without losing control during this time?
Well, I think what gives me confidence is the relationship between President Trump and Chairman Xi.
Yes.
When you have a direct line of communication at the very top, I think it's very hard for something to go wrong.
Interesting. What about the rest of the world? What about Europe?
Listen, Europeans, we look back. And there was a famous meeting where President Trump told the Europeans, "Are you crazy? Building Nord Stream 2. What are you doing? You're already getting most of your energy from Russia, and you're going to double that." And they did it, and look what happened. So what?
They blew it up.
Someone did it.
Someone did it.
Someone.
Probably Putin.
But I'm not some Norwegian fisherman who stumbled upon this like I read. But listen, the Europeans are going along with screams and shouts, but I think they'll have to reconsider the balance too. Germany has a very unbalanced export economy, and they were on the verge of deindustrialization. They were the opposite of us. They had expensive energy.
Yes.
They depended on Italy and the southern countries to keep the euro low and sold to China. Now China is becoming their competitor.
So you told me at the beginning, the first example analogy you used was with President Reagan's first term. You know, obviously a big win in the 80s, the recession in 82, a crash, and then the biggest landslide in history in 84. So are you suggesting by saying this that you know the results were obvious during the first term and within 4 years?
They were. The only difference now is that back then there was a lot of competition, but there was a certain level of civility. And the real danger here is that if there is a loss in the midterm elections, and I don't think that will happen, the Democratic House will immediately move to impeachment for something.
Of course.
Really, it's as if the legal battle will start again.
Yes.
And I think Americans won't like it again. Einstein's definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over, expecting a result.
But do you think this is aimed at Trump supporters who agree with you that the system was bad? And if you travel across the country, you'll see how terrible it was. It reduced life expectancy. But for people who hope that yesterday's move will lead to a noticeably brighter future in 4 years, is it your honest prediction that, in 4 years we'll say, actually it worked?
Yes, I believe it will work, and I know that what we were doing before wasn't working.
Yes.
So we have to try this, and I'm sure it will work. I'm very confident. The good news is we have President Trump's previous term, when everyone said none of this would work.
Yes.
Oh, tariffs on China will do this. They'll cause inflation. They didn't. This will happen to the working class. It will be bad for working class Americans. You know what? Working class Americans, workers, have outperformed managerial workers. For the bottom 50% of households, their net worth has increased faster than for the top 10% of households. I'm not happy with the market situation today, but the distribution of stocks among households. The top 10% of Americans own 88% of the stocks, 88% of the stock market. The next 40 own 12% of the market, and the bottom 50 have debts. They have credit card bills, they rent housing, they have car loans, and we need to give them some relief. I was struck by the statistics from last year.
That's the message as an observer. Wow. Okay.
All right. Or, I do. I like examples, and I was really struck by 2 different statistics last year. In the summer of 2024, Americans traveled to Europe more than ever before in history. In the summer of 2024, more Americans used food banks than ever before in history. I visited 2 food banks near my hometown to find out what's going on. And they said, for many people it's a loss of dignity to come to a food bank.
Of course.
But they observed something new. It wasn't their traditional group. It wasn't people who had lost their homes or people living on the street. These were working families who could no longer afford to shop at the Corzina grocery store. Every week, They were short 5, 6, 7 items, and they would come to the food bank to make up for it. This isn't the great America. Record European vacations, record food banks, and there's no reason why we can't keep having record European vacations, but we have to take care of others. But you know, they don't want handouts either. The Democrats had a strategy called compensate the loser. So first of all, the name of that strategy. I don't think the bottom 50% of Americans are losers. I think the system didn't work for them. I believe they're winners. It's just that the system is bad, so we're going to fix the system. And look, they want a good job. They want their kids to live better than they did. They want to own a home. They want to pay off their debts. You know, it's not complicated, and I think we can do it in the next 4 years.
You grew up in a middle-class working family. You were very successful. For a long time, you lived in the world of wealthy people. While all this was happening, were you ever at a dinner with people who said, we're doing just fine? Did anyone ever say, I tried to drive 100 miles and this country doesn't look good, like people aren't thriving? Was that among the people you knew?
No, they would say, my jet was an hour late. I had a terrible day. My jet was an hour late. I'll change the charter. So that's, no, listen, Tucker. I'm especially tuned in to what's happening in the United States because I'll say my family was very wealthy for originally the first settlers. We were very wealthy for about 250 years. My father made a lot of bad financial decisions. So when I was born, for the first 6, 7, 8 years, we were wealthy. He lost everything. And, so I've seen what it's like. I've seen both sides.
Yes.
But I was lucky that I was able to get it back. And that's, you know, I know what economic insecurity is, and I don't think people should have to experience that. Or if you want to work hard, and people do want to work hard, you know, you were on the campaign trail with President Trump. I was on the campaign trail, and I have to say, one of the most, so I went to the last, 2 stops in Pittsburgh, Grand Rapids, Michigan, in Pittsburgh, at the Duquesne Arena. I walk in, and there are workers, unions, steel workers. They're in hard hats, in vests, with their kids, and it's very touching. They just want a better life. They want their communities to be strong, for their children to live better, for there to be a baseball league for the kids. They don't care what's happening on Madison Avenue. They don't know what the new trendy restaurant in Paris is. And President Trump somehow brought together this incredible coalition of Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, and those people who were in the Rose Garden yesterday, and those people I saw at the Duquesne Arena. And I think that's incredible.
Interesting. What do you worry about as the Secretary of the Treasury? Obviously, you probably lie awake at night thinking about all the things that could go wrong in the United States economy. To be honest, what are your biggest concerns?
So, well, if I had a strong suit in my business career, I think it was risk management. So I do 2 things for myself as the leading bond salesman in the United States.
Yes.
And I think that with what's happening, I'll have a better and better story to tell as we put our economy and financial system in order. And then I try to imagine what could go really wrong. What would we do if there was another outbreak like COVID? You can't worry about things like that, but you know, I do worry about a kinetic war somewhere.
Yes.
What would we do if, for example, something happened? And what I'm trying to do is create a situation where I can worry less every day. So I'll tell you, I came. I was confirmed on January 28th. And during January, the 10-year interest rates, which are probably the most important rates in the country, mortgages are based on them. Business and capital formation are based on them. You know, I came in and they almost jumped up to 5%. And I think 5% might be an uncomfortable zone for the economy. for the Treasury that needs to issue a lot of bonds. Now that I'm here, I worry less, but I still worry. We have a lot of debt to cover. I worry that we won't make cuts that will focus on waste and fraud. I worry that this will be pushed aside. And on the other hand, I worry that the tax bill will somehow get stuck and we could have the biggest tax increase in history. Or, I worry about the usual geopolitical things, whether it's Iran, Taiwan, something going wrong between Russia and Ukraine.
So you started describing your job by saying that you're a bond salesman. You sell America's debt to the whole world.
Yes.
And I know that was a key part of the portfolio during the transition. Who can present American bonds to the world? How will your approach change? Are you confident you can do it? And how will your presentation change after yesterday?
Well, as I said right now, we're in this strange in-between state because we're going to be getting significant revenue from tariffs. And what Department of Justice is doing is substantially cutting expenses. But we're not getting recognition for that yet. But I think the markets are starting to notice. So, the 10-year bond, almost reaching a peak at 5, has now dropped below 4. The way to think about it is every basis point is about $1 billion in savings. So we've saved $100 billion, and that's probably not going to happen that quickly. Again, but I think we're setting our sails for much better financial times. And, people don't need to say that the United States is out of control. The United States are going to declare default. We're not going to. And I think every day my position gets better. And what if we just imagined a very simplified formula for the government? So G equals S minus T, spending minus taxes.
That's right.
When it comes to spending, our side, the Republicans, likes to spend, but less than the Democrats. But both sides like to spend. And then minus T, the Democrats like higher taxes. We like lower taxes. What if S actually decreases? And I think, for me, this is the exciting part, that this was unthinkable in everyone's calculations.
No one even raised this question, including Ronald Reagan, by the way.
Yes, oh no, and look, I think President Reagan had a different agenda. He increased defense spending. And remember, he's crazy. That's it. This will ruin the budget. Star Wars is madness. He's insane. And then the Iron Curtain fell. And we managed. So that's actually a Soviet term. And he used the Soviet strategy against them, against the Russians. Escalate to de-escalate.
Yes.
So he increased military spending. They tried to keep up, and then they collapsed. So, again, everything is easy in hindsight. But I think what we're doing here in terms of reducing these incredible levels of spending is important. But more importantly, I tell everyone who's willing to listen, I said, remember, DODJ is about government efficiency management, not liquidation, not destruction. So if we can actually do the job better with fewer resources, it seems unbelievable. But when I see what's happening in many of these government agencies, it's incredible. And, for example, if you think about it, I lived in Manhattan, I lived in Florida. The state of New York and the state of Florida have about the same number of people. Actually, now Florida has a little more, so New York's budget is about $235 billion, and Florida's budget is $125 billion. How do they do it? And there's no income tax in Florida. And the roads are better, and when you go to get your driver's license, it takes 15 minutes instead of 5 hours. So I wonder, can we make the rest of America look more like Florida and less like New York, or will New York one day look more like Florida?
So do you think that in 4 years we'll actually see a reduction in government spending thanks to DODJ?
Yes, considering inflation.
How long do you think Elon will be doing this?
Well, I think that Elon, as for the day-to-day work, I don't know, but I think his influence will stay with us for a long time. And I think the mainstream media have tried to demonize DODJ and everyone who works with him. And I'll tell you, we have a few people in the Treasury and a few in the tax service who are Treasury employees that I hired. I did the interviews, and, I'll tell you, there's one guy, Tom Krause. He was on television with Brett Baier the other day. Tom is incredible. He did a $100 billion tech merger with my investment business. I would hire him. I don't think I could afford him. He's doing this for the good of his country. He came in without touching any of the payment systems that false information was being spread about. In the Washington Post, he analyzed the system and in 6 weeks pointed out all the vulnerabilities. There's a young man named Sam Kirkus who was on Laura Ingram's show with me the other day, and that was my idea. I thought, let's bring him out of the shadows and stop this demonization. And what about this young man, besides the fact that he only has one pair of pants, which he likes to tell everyone about? You or I would be happy if our daughter brought him home. He's a patriot, he works hard for the country, he's analytical, and what he saw in the tax service, just in their technical systems, that's all he does. Elon has a t-shirt that he wears under his jacket, and it says technical support on it. We have a blockbuster-style government, but we should be on Netflix. We hail taxis, but we live in an Uber economy. Why can't the government be in the gig economy? It's not that hard.
Can I ask you a strange question? Who exactly runs the Federal Reserve System? I'm not quite... How can you have such a key entity, an institution that obviously has the most direct influence on the markets of all, and it seems to be outside of political control? What is it?
Well, listen, I think that during my confirmation hearing, and I was actually at the dinner where Jerome Powell was last night. At my confirmation hearing, I said, ma'am, I will only talk about the mistakes the Federal Reserve has made in the past. I will not talk about the ones they will make in the future. That's true, but I think it's important for monetary policy that they are isolated, that some of the other things they do, regulation. They got involved, DI, and they got involved with climate. I actually think that affects their monetary policy and makes them vulnerable, so I think they should focus on monetary policy, do everything possible for the American economy, the American people, keep inflation low, and then the rest. There are a lot of other banking agencies too.
So now the Federal Reserve controls the weather? What are they doing about the climate?
Well, I'll tell you. There's something. The Secretary of the Treasury heads the Financial Stability Oversight Council, and that's all the financial regulators. 2 weeks before Silicon Valley Bank went bankrupt, the Financial Stability Oversight Council issued a report. And guess what they called the biggest threat to the financial system? Climate.
Really? Yes.
It's not like there was a major bank in California that was experiencing a slow outflow of assets, and that this would lead to the bankruptcy of one bank then another. That was the climate, thank you. So, as far as I can see, everything was pretty good with the climate. They failed, the regulators failed, and I think that's what people are starting to get tired of. And that brings me back to one of my favorite phrases that President Trump uses. Common sense. Yes, look, it's just common sense. If there are a lot of deposits that can leave your bank with one click, there shouldn't be all these long-term assets. But they were too busy worrying about the weather, and there was also a certain degree of regulatory capture. It seems unbelievable to the average citizen that the chief executive officer of Silicon Valley Bank was on the board of directors of the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco, which was his main regulator. Are they going to tell this guy what to do?
Why is gold moving around the world in such huge quantities right now?
Well, several reasons. Continuing, it's moving physically, it's moving because of possible tariffs here. So, for example, it was unclear whether we were going to exempt gold from tariffs, which I guess we did. So there was a big movement from alternatives in Switzerland, from alternatives in London to bring it to New York. And look, there are many different stores of value. Over time, Bitcoin is becoming a store of value. Gold has historically been a store of value. You know, I think it's interesting, where do we see the demand for gold coming from? A huge amount is coming from China.
Yes.
Where, as I said, they are in the middle of an economic recession, a depression. People don't trust the Chinese currency because they have capital controls.
Yes.
There are 1.6, 1.4 billion Chinese people who want to take their money out, but they can't. They'll let them buy gold.
So that's the answer, you think, but doesn't it seem interesting to you that even now in 2025, when everything is abstract and digital, gold is still widely considered a reliable store of value around the world?
I think that this store, gold has a lot of stories connected to it, right? Yes, my friend's grandmother during the financial crisis in Russia in '98, then there was big inflation. My friend's grandmother bought 18 bicycles and kept them in her apartment.
So she managed her investments in bicycles.
Great. I wish I could do that too. So, but look, gold also has other uses, many uses. Jewelry in India. But this is something that historically everyone has agreed on. And gold can't have a fiscal problem. Gold can't have a huge budget deficit. Gold can't have a war. So the very fact that it's an isolated thing makes it very interesting. And the fact that the entire world trading system, until Richard Nixon unpegged us, was tied to gold.
So you're not against gold?
Oh, no. When I had my fund, I think people could have called me a gold bug.
How did you end up interacting with Zelensky?
The president asked me, to go to Kiev. Well, he actually asked me to lead the economic agreement, which was part of his peace plan. And I think it's important to consider the arc of President Trump's peace plan. And he really structured it well. We were going to sign an agreement with the Ukrainians, and it would do several things. First, it would make the United States and Ukraine partners to bring us closer together. Secondly, it would be a symbol to the Russian leadership that the United States is not abandoning Ukraine. But what's important, thirdly, it would show the American people that we have an economic interest and that we weren't just giving out these huge grants, which was the story of United States Agency for International Development.
Of course.
So, if Ukraine succeeds, we will succeed too. And this could become a long-term partnership. Now, the president, I thought it was important to take the agreement to Kiev and present it to President Zelensky. Everyone told me, oh no, let him meet you in Vienna. He'll be at the Munich Security Conference in a few days. I said, no, I want to go there and discuss it with him. So, I ended up in Kiev. It's very interesting to go to Kiev, to fly to Poland, Kiev. Then you get on, I don't know if you've been on it, you get on this overnight train for 10 hours and arrive in Kiev at 8:30 in the morning. And for everyone who said, oh, President Trump is giving in to the Russians, he's not giving in to the Russians. The Russians bombed Kiev 4 hours before I arrived. They hadn't bombed since November, so the Russians didn't like the look of this deal because they thought it was actually something solid for the American and Ukrainian people.
So what happened?
President Zelensky wasn't inclined to sign the deal. That day, we had a lively discussion. I told him, yes, You have 50 reporters there. I'm here to show that there is no disagreement between the American people, the Russian people, the Ukrainian people, between the American leadership and the Ukrainian leadership. And I said, you've opened up a Grand Canyon-sized disagreement. What are we going to tell these people? And he said, tell them I'll sign the deal in Munich. And I said, so you'll sign the deal when you see Vice President Vance and Secretary of State Rubio in Munich?
Yes.
He didn't sign it there. The following week there were a lot of discussions. They were begging to come to the White House saying he should be made to sign the deal before he comes. And then he came to the Oval Office and ruined what should have been the simplest thing in the world. He was supposed to show up, hold a press conference. We were supposed to have a private lunch. If he had something on his mind, there would have been 9 of us. 9 of them in the White House dining room. He could have voiced his concerns then. And there's a famous photograph in the East Wing ballroom where everything is laid out on the table for signing, but it was never signed.
So this is an unelected president of a client state whose bureaucrats are paid directly by American taxpayers, and their pensions are funded as well.
They have the lowest retirement age in Europe. It's 60. In France, it's 62. In Italy, it's 67.
And we're paying for this. So at some point, you wouldn't expect a person in such an extremely unstable position, I think it's fair to say, to act arrogantly with American officials, to scold them, to scoff, and, basically to behave like a madman. How do you explain this audacity? What is it?
Look, there are a few things. He was an entertainer and a kind of vaudeville performer, and he was an ordinary person thrown into a complicated time. He rose to great heights. Yes, he was heroic, and I think he got stuck and is under tremendous pressure. I think some government officials around him in the cabinet are very good. I think some people there, the advice isn't the best. His advisors aren't perfect. If we go back to the agreement, one of the great advantages of the agreement is that it ensures the money goes to the American people and the Ukrainian people. Because, Tucker, whatever this agreement was, it wasn't one of those predatory Chinese deals where you have to sign over a mine or a port. Or it wasn't a loan designed to take over. Here's a loan. You'll never be able to pay it back. We'll take it. This is a genuine economic partnership. We're investing loans from foreign banks and American know-how. We don't make money unless they make money. And you know who doesn't like that? The people who are reaching into the cash register.
Right, Ma?
That's right, because we regulated the flow of money. Yeah, so I think that's part of the disruption. I hope that was a bug, not a feature of the system, and that it's already been fixed. We expect the Ukrainian technical team to arrive early next week, and I hope we can sign this and get back to a win-win situation. Because when President Trump, I didn't tell you the whole point of the deal. President Trump wanted to make this deal with the Ukrainians so that he could then go to the Russian leadership and show them that we really support the Ukrainians, but on an economic basis, and then the Russians would have an incentive to come to the negotiating table as well. So, the sequence was disrupted, yes, but I think we can fix this.
Will we ever get an audit of where the billions went, where the weapons we sent ended up? What happened to the money, the pallets of $100 bills? Where are they now? Why is it so hard to get an audit of what happened to the money?
I don't know. Tucker, in my life, I always try to look forward, and I think if this deal works out, that money might end up being small change.
Yes, of course.
That's a good way to think about it. When the Iron Curtain fell, the economies of Ukraine and Poland were about the same size. Now Poland's economy is 3.5 or 4 times bigger.
Yes.
Poland will have the highest gross domestic product per capita, higher than some Western European countries.
Of course.
Ukraine, as you noted, due to various aspects of kleptocracy, was held back.
Yes.
So hopefully, with the help of the United States and President Trump's efforts to reach this peace agreement, the Ukrainian people will be able to have a better future.
For a finance minister, you're quite a capable diplomat, very diplomatic in your language. Last question, how are you? Because all of this will soon come back to the announcement about tariffs yesterday. And since this is really a complete departure from what we're all used to and from our expectations, this is new and people are concerned about it. How do you maintain discipline in messaging within the administration, in any administration? And specifically in this case, how do you decide how you're going to explain it? Who will explain it? How do you prevent contradictions in messaging? What is that process like?
We follow, for example.
Yes.
We know we had a meeting yesterday morning. We had a meeting after the announcement in the Rose Garden before we went out to the media. And he's his own best spokesperson.
Yes.
No one can do it better. And then, we go our separate ways and everyone is united in this and his vision. That's why we're here. If you don't want to be a part of this, you shouldn't be here.
But do you ever say, for example, maybe this is the one who can reassure potential bond buyers, investors in the markets? This person terrifies the markets. We need someone who will reassure them.
Well, the only thing I'll say is that no one should listen to anyone in the markets who talks about the United States dollar except President Trump or me. We are the only ones who speak on behalf of this administration, the United States government, on dollar policy issues. I think I can tell you that we have a strong dollar policy, and we are implementing all the necessary measures to ensure its strength in the long term. Can it fluctuate, on the Bloomberg terminal? In the short term, of course. Can there be individual bilateral changes between the dollar and the Mexican currency, the dollar and the yen? Yes, I'm glad that's not happening. But over time, if we lay solid economic foundations and implement this transformational program, the dollar will be in great shape and the American people will be in great shape.
Secretary, thank you.
Thank you.
We appreciate it.